then continue by introducing our first and unfortunately only keynote speaker today. But it's a great pleasure to do this on the other hand. So Sam Dupont, he's a senior lecturer at the Department of Biological and Environmental Sciences here at University of Gothenburg. He's though located at Kristinebergs research station up in Fiskebäckskil. And some of us have been there and we know what a fantastic place that is. And the place becomes even more fantastic due to the fact that Sam is working there. Sam is also the vice director of CeCAR and was one of the main applicants for our major grant that made it possible to start up CeCAR. And he has done a tremendous job in selling in CeCAR, in communicating large-scale collective action problems. But apart from that, his main research topic is on the effect of global changes and on marine species and ecosystems. And most of us associate him with ocean acidification, but also other disturbances in the ocean is of interest, like global warming. Sam has been and still is extremely successful in his academic endeavor. As of this morning, when I checked, he has 8,000 citations, which isn't bad. And he has been published in numerous prominent journals like Nature and PNAS. And recently, he was even designated one of the world's most influential scientists in the world. Very impressive. And I know this guy. It's amazing. I would also like to say, and we will probably be further aware of this today, but Sam is also passionate about science communication and is by far one of the university's most active scholars in terms of spreading the academic word, including conducting experiments where he's letting the public taste poisoned shrimps. I don't know, perhaps he will elaborate more on this in the talk. So needless to say, I'm really looking forward to this keynote. I will do my best to take notes on anyone who wishes to ask questions or give comments. And if you want to do that, use the raise hand function that Niklas talked about. So with these introductory words, I leave the floor to you, Sam. Most welcome.
Thank you, Zver. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully it's going to work well. Here we go. So good morning, everybody. So it's kind of a weird experience to give a keynote virtually on Zoom, but I guess most of us have learned how to do that over the last month by teaching, replacing meetings and conference online. And I'm quite surprised how well these things work. But anyway, feel free if something isn't clear, if you have a question, if there's a technical issue to stop me. So when Sverker and the other guys in CeCAR asked me to give a keynote, I was really honored because I was involved in CeCAR from the very beginning. That's been a transformative experience for me. And so that was an opportunity for me to share a little bit what we do and also highlight the importance of the center in the field where I'm coming from. So I'm a natural scientist, I'm a biologist, and I really try to investigate what's happening in the ocean today. And that's also the perfect day for this, because today is the ocean, the World Ocean Day. So it's a good opportunity to reflect on what needs to be done and also celebrate the fact that we are about to start a new decade for the ocean. So the program and at the same time the take-home message for this keynote will be, first I will for some of you who are not that familiar about the ocean, explain the importance of the ocean for all of us. And then from that, build up on the fact that we are starting now a decade for the ocean science. So we are about to start an interesting journey where we'll have the opportunity to actually drive significant change that hopefully will be positive for the ocean. But the main key message is really that if we want to drive change, we need to act. There's been more than enough talking so far, so we really need to walk the walk. We need to start acting, start to implement solutions. And to do that, we will have to be extremely strategic. And that's basically what I'm going to try to build on here, is that we need to identify what is the real science that we need if we really want to achieve a healthy ocean in the future. And I will try also to convince all of you, that, especially the ones that are not part of the Center for Collective Action Research, that CeCAR and the large-scale collective action framework is a fantastic tool to actually achieve this. And together with all the other initiatives that are out there, that could be basically the filter in which we can see the world to drive positive change. But first, let's step back a little bit and just realize that, you know, the ocean is extremely important. And that's something that probably most of you understand and realize, but it's not always obvious for everyone. Basically, we live on the blue planet, as you know, and the ocean is providing us tremendous services. So there's this idea that wherever you live in the world, the ocean has an influence on you. And wherever you live in the world, you have an impact on the ocean. And as I said, the ocean is providing us a lot of services. They say, like, every second breath you take, the ocean is providing the oxygen. You have tons of medicines that are discovered in the ocean that can be extremely useful. One of the most promising anti-cancer medicine today comes from a sea cucumber that has been collected in the ocean. Of course, it's providing a lot of seafood. Of course, in Scandinavia here, that's maybe not the most important part, but in some countries, this is the main source of protein, and it's increasingly important as the human population is growing. It also cultural services. It's a source of amazing biodiversity. You have things in the ocean that you have nowhere else, and that we have to protect at all costs. And again, the ocean is also protecting our coasts and interfering with the climate. So without the ocean, we would not be there, as simple as that. And the problem is that if we don't have a healthy ocean, we won't be healthy ourselves. And there's this really clear link between the ocean health and the human health. And just to give you one example, one of the main causes of mortality today when it comes to chronic diseases is obesity. And obesity is caused by multiple factors, from nutrition, lack of exercise, stress, mental health, and so on. But basically, the ocean is one of the best solutions we have for that problem, because, for example, the seafood-based diet is the only documented diet that really have a positive impact on obesity. And there's also a link with social science studies that show that if you go to the sea, or if you live close to the sea, you're going to be more active. So there's also like this recreation, but also the fact that you will be potentially more healthy, less stress, and so on. And there's probably out there a lot of really interesting medicine that can contribute to the problem. So the ocean is really a key part of our life, even if you live in the middle of the land, even if you don't like seafood. And just to give you like an example of how the ocean can contribute to our health, and using the actuality, is actually, you know, that the test that is used today to actually test for contamination with the virus is basically coming from the ocean, because it's been developed through bacteria that have been found on the deep sea close to vents. And these bacteria have a special property that they are actually really resilient to temperature. So they can function at really high temperature, and enzymes extracted from these bacteria are used for the PCR, so the method used to amplify DNA, that is used for the test of the coronavirus. But even more interesting, there's some research that is done in France today on a worm called Arenicola here that lives inside the sediment. And this worm is amazing because it's living in the tidal zone. So during the low tide, these guys have to live in the sediment for hours and hours without any oxygen. So they developed to survive this an amazing blood that is able to capture oxygen. And so when there is no oxygen in the environment, they just live on the oxygen that is stored in their body. And now they are doing clinical trial to actually use this property as a way to keep people alive when they have their lungs full of liquid, and that's one of the consequences of the coronavirus. So you can see, like, there are some medicines that are actually tested now, even for something as new as the coronavirus, with foam creature coming from the ocean. So the ocean is important. That was the whole point of this. The second part is that, unfortunately, the ocean health is also impacted by us. And there are multiple ways you can actually evaluate that. And one is called the Ocean Health Index. And I put a lot of reference in this presentation, and please feel free to have a look if you want more information. You can ask questions later. But basically, that's a global index that helps to have a snapshot of what is the situation for the ocean today. And if you check, basically the health of the ocean is about 60%, 0% being completely unhealthy, 100% being completely healthy. So it's not very good. Basically, that would be the message. And it's on average between 36 and 80%, depending on where you are. So in some countries, most of the time, the rich countries, the ocean is healthier. Where in developing countries, where the guys are actually much more dependent on the ocean for their survival, the situation is more dire. But that highlights the fact that we need to do something about it. And these negative effect comes from us. There is no doubt about this. And the problem is that we've used the ocean as a garbage bin for generations. And that was kind of manageable when we were not too many on the planet, but as you know, we are more and more. So now we reached 7.8 billion people on the planet, and it's growing and growing, and it will keep growing till probably saturation around 10 billion people by the end of the century. But just by the time I will be done with this presentation, there will be 5,000 more people on Earth. And another number that really shocked me when I realized that was that basically, if you compare how many we are today compared to how many we were when I was born, when I was a kid, we basically are 2 times more people on the planet. So the human population doubled in my lifetime. And because of that, as I said, we use the ocean as a garbage bin, and the ocean starts to change globally. So we are polluting, we are releasing a lot of things. Plastic is a good example, or litter in general. It's everywhere. Now, there is not a part of the ocean where there is no litter, where there is no plastic. You can go to the deep sea, to the Mariana Trench, to the Antarctic. You can see the impact of humans. And plastic is a good example for that, because it's really something that everybody understands and everybody can see and realize as a species, we have an impact on the ocean. And the numbers are really scary. So there's 25 million tons of plastic packaging that ends up in the ocean every minute. And then if you check for other sources of pollution, it's even worse. Like for every truck of plastic that is released into the ocean, you have 114 trucks of something else, and this something else is carbon dioxide. So we produce this ridiculous number of greenhouse gases, CO2, into the atmosphere, and all these things together makes that the ocean is under the threat. And we entered what is called the Anthropocene, so the phase in story of Earth where the human is impacting the world as a whole and the ocean as a whole. And you have global effects from global warming, acidification, hypoxia, which is a reduction in oxygen, increased precipitation will have effect on salinity, you have more extreme events, storms, and so on. And then you have local impact, because it's not because we are changing the world globally that we don't have any local impact. So we keep destroying habitat, over-exploiting resources by overfishing and so on. There's pollution, like releasing of 100,000 different substances into the ocean, and so on and so on. So basically, we are in trouble. And we have really good reason to think that we need to address that as soon as we can. For example, the last time in the history of Earth where we had such a big global event, like something like climate change, was the end of the Permian. And what happened was the third extinction. So because of global warming, because of ocean acidification, massive mortality occurred in the ocean, leading to an extinction of 92% of all the marine species. And I'm not saying that this is what's going to happen now, but what I'm saying is that last time it happened, it had dramatic consequences. And we have evidence today that we are entering a new phase of extinction. And if you don't trust me, just read all these reports. You have basically a really, really strong scientific consensus today that if we keep as we do today with all these pressures, we will have to face dramatic consequences. And for example, the IPCC report on climate change used the phrasing virtually certain when it comes to consequences. And virtually certain is the most certain any scientist can be. So we know, basically we have enough information, we have enough science today to know that something needs to be done. So if I stop here first for a few seconds and summarize where we are, we can't ignore the ocean. The ocean is critical for all of us, wherever we live, whatever we do. And in the same way, we all have an impact through our activities, to our consumption, to our, basically whatever we do has one way or another an impact on the ocean. And this link that we have between the ocean and us really is important for our health and our well-being. And this link is under threat. And so basically, we don't need more science to basically make that point. We know more than enough to say, enough talking, we really need to act. And in a way, we are entering a really exciting time because more and more policymakers all around the world realize the importance of that link between the ocean and us, and realize that we need to do something about it. And one of the first positive signals was when the UN released the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and actually for one of the first time really highlighted at the global level the importance of the ocean by highlighting that in the SDG 14. And within the Sustainable Developmental Goal 14, you had a bunch of different targets that really highlight the importance of the ocean, and that something needs to be done, from reduction of marine pollution to restore and protect ecosystem, acidification, fishing, coastal protection, and so on and so on. So that was a really great first signal. And now we are moving even to the next level with the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. So now we're going to enter in a decade where the ocean science will be promoted, where the ocean science will be coordinated at the global level, where we're going to be able to actually work together to make the ocean better. So we have 10 years of exciting science. So for a guy like me, for a marine biologist, this is something that I was looking forward to all my career. So that's an amazing opportunity. And basically what needs to be achieved had been summarized in 6 different goals. So we want a clean ocean, we want a safe ocean, a healthy and resilient ocean, a sustainably harvested and produced ocean, a predictable ocean where we have the ability to forecast changes and then be prepared for them, like a bit like we do with the weather, and a transparent ocean where data are shared all around the place. So these are really great goals. And more recently, the UN released a 0 draft for their implementation plan. So basically providing a little bit more flesh to the bones, like what needs to be done. And this has been sent for reviews. And the reviews came in like a few weeks ago, and I had a chance to read it and review it. And basically that's the framework that is proposed. And I really like the general concept, which is we need science, and that's completely true. We need science if we want to address these big questions. If we want to make the ocean healthy, resilient, and sustainable, we will need to base that on science. So, and the framework is really based on the fact that on the left-hand side, you have the ocean of today. On the right-hand side, we have the ocean we want. And then in the middle is like, what is this? We need to produce the science we need to achieve this ocean we want. And it's kind of a linear framework where you generate kind of the science supply paradigm, where we generate knowledge, you deploy the knowledge, and then you apply the knowledge. And when I was reading that, I thought like, okay, this is an interesting framework in many ways because it's highlighting the importance of the ocean, but it's not as creative as it could be. And I can understand why it's written that way. You have to basically be really careful, please everybody. It's kind of a really difficult task to write such an implementation plan. But on the other hand, it doesn't provide the key yet. I think it's going to evolve, of course, the key yet to how we have to do this. And for me, there were 2 main issues. One issue is that it's a little bit of a backward thinking. It's we produce science and then we use it instead of thinking like, what do we need really? So start with the right-hand side. What are the actions that we need to take if we really want to achieve the ocean we want? And based on that, we can then go backwards and really identify specifically what is the science that we need. So that would be like my first like reflection on this implementation plan. And then the second part was, this is highly natural science oriented, which should please me. I'm a natural scientist. But on the other hand, I also understand through my participation in the Center for Collective Action Research that natural science is an important part, but social science as a science, really, social scientists as a science is extremely important if you want to achieve this. It's not going to happen without doing some really deep and interesting research on social science. And as it is now, in the implementation plan of UN Decade, social science is used as kind of something that's going to happen later. They highlight the importance of social science, but not really as a research field, more like as a tool. And then more like last week, I looked at the talk by Petra Wallberg that is actually also talking right now in another parallel event about what Sweden wants to do. And Sweden, in the context of the UN Decade, identified different priorities. So they want to work on one tool, which is, I think, a really interesting approach to center the country priorities on one tool, which is ecosystem-based management. This is one of the many tools that could be used, but that's one. And then you have other different topics that are highlighted as important. Ocean literacy, so the understanding of the importance of the ocean that in all the different actors in society, the role of innovation, so creating new knowledge, new technology to basically address all these issues, and then creation of data and models, for example, for forecasting. But again, all these are quite general. And if we want to be successful in this decade, if we want to do something really useful, we will have to be extremely strategic. And today, none of these documents are providing the framework that we need to really identify the scientific priorities. And I always give this kind of metaphor. We are basically riding on the Titanic now, and we want to avoid sinking. The problem is that all these frameworks are so general that what they want to do is basically map the whole thing, like have the details of every cabin on the boat, like how it works or everything. And that's not the science we need. The science we need is basically the specific science to avoid the ship to sink. So in a way, we really, if we want to avoid the Titanic to sink, if we really want to avoid the ocean to be destroyed with the consequences it would have on us, we're going to have to be extremely strategic. So basically, the document is highlighting the fact that we need to act. We have to move from this diagnosis of the problem toward finding solutions, but it doesn't really yet provide the keys on how to do that. It's far too general, and by being too general, saying, okay, we have to measure everything everywhere, it becomes unrealistic. It's not yet having a strong focus on solution and actions. As I said, there is a little bit of backward thinking. And also there is, for me, a lack of true interdisciplinarity, a lack of connection with social science. And also what is really lacking is a timeline. There are things that are ready to be implemented today. So we should act on these first and implement what we can and realize if it's not working, why is it not working? What are the limits of implementation? Is it really science, natural science? Is it basically because we don't know how to communicate that properly to different stakeholders and so on? So we need to work on really identifying these priorities, because at the end of the day, we have limited resources. And if we want to do science we really need to find the one that are targeting changes and targeting actions. So all this is great because it's full of good intention, is highlighting the importance of the ocean, the importance of acting and so on. But as you know, the road to hell is paved in good intentions. So intentions are not good enough. And I was presenting this framework to some students, and actually they were really mad when I explained what the framework was all about, because they said, this, as it is now, this is the perfect excuse for many people not to act, because basically it's a call for more science. And so the danger here is that people will say, okay, we need more science, so let's wait 10 more years to have more science and actually act then when we know better. And I think that's the wrong way to actually do this. We should act as fast as we can and build on the knowledge as when it comes. But there are things that can be done. So we want to be sure that the UN Decade is not used as an excuse to delay action. So for my second stop, I think don't hear me wrong. I'm really excited about the UN Decade. it's a fantastic opportunity, but so far it's a little bit specific. And so there is this danger of inaction. And we really need to focus on change, on positive change. And that will come from solution. And to do that, we really need to prioritize. So if you want to prioritize, you really have to think about what are the options. There's someone who has the microphone on, so it would be nice if you turn it off. Thanks. So what are our options? So basically what we want to do is drive change. And that's something that is at the core of CeCAR. It's like basically drive positive change and focusing for CeCAR on large scale collective action, which is extremely complicated. And we know that that will require changes in society at all levels. And that's a very complicated task. And if I go back to the ocean and all these global and local challenges, what can we do? And basically the situation is what you see on the picture. We are on the right-hand side of this picture. We are the little mouse, and on the left, the cat is basically all the threat that we are putting on the environment. Is climate change, is pollution, is overfishing, and so on and so on. So when you're facing that situation, you basically have three options. One, you can wait and see. And it's obvious in a situation like that, seeing the urgency of the problem, that is definitely not the thing to do. I think if you don't do anything, there's a fair chance that you're going to end up eaten. The best solution, if you want to address this, is kill the cat. And again, like for all if we make the parallel with all the things I've been talking about, this is a huge challenge. So we know it's complicated to kill the cat, but that's basically what you should aim at. You should aim at getting rid of the problem. But in that case, that doesn't seem to be a really smart thing to do for the mouse to just jump on the cat and try to kill it. So you have a third option, which is escape. And escape is not a bad strategy. You might want to escape the cat, stay alive, and then find a strategy to come back with your friends, with tools, whatever, and kill the cat. So basically, these are the two realistic options. Escape, buy some time, which in what we are talking about is called adaptation, or kill the cat, which will mean mitigation. And all these depends a little bit on what scale you are looking at. So we know that many of the changes that are impacting the ocean are global. And that means that will require global solution. If we can't locally tackle the problem of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, we have to tackle that globally. So that's a mitigation problem. But even if it's a global challenge like carbon dioxide with all the symptoms it has, it links also to local challenges. So the picture you see on the right-hand side is this oyster farmer in Hong Kong. These guys are already hit by local pollution, and they're going to be hit even harder with climate change and acidification and so on. And they don't really care what's happening at the global scale. What they need to do is keep their job, keep their family business and so on, things they've been doing for generations. And for them, you also have a local challenge. So for example, in that case, you want to ensure that they will still be able to produce their oysters and sell them. And to do that, you have adaptation option. You have things that you can use to basically help them, not to resolve the global challenges, but help them to maintain their business. And to do that, there is no shortcut. You have to go on the site, you have to talk to them, you have to identify the problems and develop local solutions that sometimes requires innovation. So you have these two sides of what we can do, the two potential actions. You have mitigation and you have adaptation. And this is coming from a really nice paper in Science by someone called Jean-Pierre Gattuso, who basically make the point that we have to do both. There is no way we're going to resolve this global crisis for the ocean, wherever you are, without considering both mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation is ultimately what you want to do. It's killing the cat, but it's going to take time. So that means that people like the oyster farmers, they don't have the time to wait for this. So we need to work on adaptation too. So both are important, adaptation to buy time and mitigation to get rid of the problem. But they also highlight the importance that if we don't mitigate, if we don't start right now working in reducing our carbon dioxide emission, adaptation won't work. At some point, we're going to reach a tipping point, whatever we do, where the problem will be so big that there will be no way we can adapt to it. So the key point here is like they check that for different ecosystems, seagrass, mangroves, all the most productive ecosystem on Earth in the ocean. And they showed like there is no way we will be able to maintain these ecosystems and their services without a combination of mitigation and adaptation. And it's also kind of interesting to see when you travel a little bit and talk to different countries that there is an attempt to reinvent the wheel. In many places, you already have really nice innovations so that can be used for adaptation. Like France has been culturing algae for decades, and that's something that started in Sweden now, which is great. But we should realize that we should not reinvent the wheel. Okay, we should sometimes recycling all ideas is good enough. And we have a bunch of options out there that we can already use and implement in all around the world. And they come into these two big categories, as I said, mitigation. So that can be used by reduce carbon dioxide emission or remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, develop some new technology for this. But then you have also the mitigation side that basically you have three different aspects. You have protecting what's there. So you want to ensure that you maintain the ecosystem as healthy as possible, for example, by developing marine protected area, reduce other source of stress and stuff like this. You can also repair what has been damaged, for example, restoring degrading ecosystem, something called assisted evolution. So use like speed up evolution in the lab to maintain some species in the field. And then you have the adaptation really, which is adaptation at a human level. So change the way we do things to basically be able to cope with the threat of these global and local threats. So we have a lot of options. So we need really to for every place in the world, for every country, to identify the priorities. And you can do that through a systematic evolution. So you need to see what are the main problems, what can we do, and what can we do now? And if we can't do it now, why is that? Because there is a problem in implementing it, because people are not ready, because they won't accept the change, or because we miss some science. So there are different barriers for this. And so we have to check what's available, when it can be implemented, and what is preventing the implementation. And for that, it's really important that we are extremely realistic. So we should not try to do things that we won't be able to do. Like if we do a national strategic plan, we have to be sure that we will be able to do this in a reasonable amount of time. It's like, because if we don't have the tools, it's basically trying to build a house with the wrong tool, and that ends with a disastrous result. Another thing is that sometimes we are really good at something, but that does not necessarily mean that is the best tool for it. And you know the story, like if you give a small boy a hammer, and he will find that everything he encounters needs pounding. And that's the same here. Sometimes we have tools, things that we are really good at, but that doesn't mean that it should be the main priorities. We should really focus on what really needs to be done and prioritize our resources toward this. And to do this, it's not going to be only natural science, of course. It's going to be all the different actors in society and the link between this. So that's going to mean change in legislation, acceptance in public and industry, changing behaviors at different levels, and all that, of course, linked to information and science, but not only natural science, of course, also social science. And that's something that needs to be much stronger today, for example, in the UN Decade Framework. And to do that, basically, it's an evaluation of really what are the needs, and that can be done in a really systematic way. So I was lucky enough to be part of a working group in Norway where we made the evaluation of what is needed in terms of science and actions when it comes to climate change and ocean acidification on ocean-based industry and society in Norway. And that really helped us to identify what were the key gaps in science and how these could be overcome along different timelines. And the very important part when you do this kind of evaluation is really do that in a systematic way. Today, and you can see what's happening today with the coronavirus, things turns into opinion, and some experts' voice are really stronger than others. It's kind of who is shouting the loudest sometimes, and who seems to have the more authority. And a good example is the crazy story that you probably heard about for the hydroxychloroquine drugs. And this guy on the picture, Didier Raoult, made a really strong case that it was basically the magic pills that will help curing people with that. And then it became not really science anymore. It's populism, it's opinions, and so on. And we really want to avoid that when it comes to identify national strategies. We need to keep our eyes open on the international communities, what's happening out there, not only focusing on local experts, local agencies, but really be open to the world to be sure that we can really capture what needs to be done. So my first stop is really, the ocean is really important. We are entering the ocean decade that's going to start next year. That is an amazing opportunity, but we really need, if we want this to work, because we have limited resources, because we have limited time, we really need to be strategic and really identify the main needs in every country, in every place, and also globally, of course. And the thing is that if we want to do this right, we have amazing frameworks already available that can help us to identify these priorities. And I will talk briefly about 3 of these frameworks. And one of the most promising and exciting one, of course, is the large-scale collective action framework that CeCAR has developed. But you also have other ones that can be helpful. And one is that I will talk about is the ocean and human health. And also one that is kind of a prolongation of the large-scale collective action, which is the framework on how we can help society to reconnect with nature. So briefly, most of you from CeCAR, you know all about it, but there are a few people not from CeCAR. CeCAR, the Center for Collective Action Research, was built to basically aim at addressing all the main global issues in the world. And the global changes on the ocean is one of those. And it's really an attempt to provide a structure on how can we identify exactly what I said before, the main actors. And these large-scale collective actions are very complex to address because you have a lot of actors that sometimes are separated by large distance. That can be physical distance, cultural distance, but also temporal distance. We need to cope with things that will happen in decades, not happening right now. So it's extremely complex. But then we basically last year published a really instrumental paper called On the Precondition for Large-Scale Collective Action, which is basically the framework that can be used, for example, for the UN Decade for the Ocean to identify what needs to be done. And you have a quote here, "We thereby set the stage for future research and the development of necessary policies to reach crucial targets such as the UN Sustainable Development Goals." And in a nutshell, this is how it looks like. And I'm not going to go into great details because we're going to hear more about that during the day. But basically, the reason why it's so complicated to achieve the level of collective action that we need, sustaining collective action, is because you have all these stressors and facilitators. So you have a lot of stressors that are preventing the implementation of this collective action. And then you have facilitators, things that we can do that will actually make it easier to achieve these points. And what is really key is the intervention of third parties. So basically, that's what I call actions. It's what the things that policymakers can do, communicators can do, scientists can do to reduce these stressors and increase these facilitators. So this is a way of thinking that can really help all these large goals, like the sustainable goal, the UN framework, to basically identify what needs to be done. How can we basically facilitate these third-party interventions to reach this sustainable collective action? Another really interesting framework is the ocean and human health. And that's been the work that has been done by a group called SOFI, for sea, ocean, and public health in Europe. And the job of this group for several years was to collect what is known today and provide a strategy for Europe, but it's also valid for the world, on what needs to be done to protect the ocean with the human health as the center. And that's another very interesting framework because it can really place health at the center. And that might be a fantastic tool to convince people, to convince policymakers of what needs to be done. So the framework you can see here, it's a very complicated network here, and I'm not going to go into detail with this, but basically it shows like for every health issues that can be disease or prevention, you can see how it links to the ocean and how all these services that the ocean is providing to us is threatened by all the actions we have. So if you say, I want to prevent this disease, you will have a really clear idea of what needs to be done in the ocean, what are the priorities in your country, in your location. So that's a very fantastic tool too. And personally, over the years, as Ver said, I've been increasingly interested in how to engage people.
Adesso non hanno ancora iniziato, va bene.
Sorry, somebody is speaking, so if you can turn off the microphone, that would be nice.
Questo qua della Camilla invece non va l'audio.
I think it's
Infatti ti ho detto, cioè, se c'è la
Francesca.
So let's go back. So as I said, you have the ocean and human health. And as I said, like over the years, because I'm a scientist, I used to work in the lab, but I realized it's really important for me to reach out with my science, with my message and so on. And that's why I realized that we really need to reconnect with nature, because if you don't care, you're not gonna change. And one good example is that progress, I would say, tend to disconnect us with nature, and that makes sense. I was thinking the other day about how, protecting yourself from weather and so on has been a huge progress, of course. But the more progress we have, the more we disconnect with nature. And I found this really cool paper in Science where they showed that kids actually know more about Pokemon than they know about plants and animals around them. So they actually asked them to identify Pokemon cards and animals and plants, and they actually knew much more Pokemon. So that's highlighting the disconnection with nature. And the thing is that reconnecting with nature is a path to happiness. Colleagues of mine, Matthew White, published last year or 2 years ago a really cool paper showing that if you spend only 112 minutes a week in nature, that has significant effect on your health being. But it's also a path to sustainability. If you reconnect with nature, that will change us profoundly and hopefully make society more caring about the ocean, the nature in general, and drive change. And this paper is presenting an interesting framework again about what kind of change are more likely to drive change in society. So they have this idea of leverage point. So you have all these different things that can help us to reconnect from nature. On the right-hand side, there are deep philosophical changes. On the left-hand side is more shallow and material things. And they say you can actually choose your fight and see where you want to put the pressure if you really want to change the system as a whole. So that's also very nice, because if we put that in the context of the ocean, we say, okay, ocean literacy, like making people care to experience about the ocean, will be on the right-hand side and have more chance of putting the system up and then induce the change we need. So as a fourth step, we need to change, for sure. We want to protect the ocean. There are things we can do. We need to identify these priorities, and all these frameworks that I presented can help us to do this, because that help us to identify who are the person we need to talk to, what kind of actions do I need to lead, so basically what I want these people to do, and basically what science do we need, natural and social science, that we need to actually do this. And that's exactly what CeCAR is all about. And I will just now finish with 3 short examples to illustrate this, like how it worked before or what kind of science have been identified as key priorities for the ocean. The first one is the story of oyster aquaculture in the United States. So about 15 years ago, oyster farmers on the west coast of the US realized that they had a problem. They couldn't produce the little spat, the baby oyster that they needed to produce the oyster in the field. So the way they work is they collect oyster outside, they bring them back in the lab, in a hatchery, spawn them, produce eggs and sperm, and make little larvae, and the larvae develop into a juvenile, and then they transfer the juvenile out, and that's how they produce oysters. The problem is that year they were unable to produce these little baby oysters. They were all dying for some reasons. And these things happen sometimes. But then it's most of the time a disease or something like that. But that year they couldn't identify the problem. So the sequence of events that happened was, first it was a diagnosis. So what is actually causing this? And the scientists and many others, but Dick Feely on the left-hand side, basically realized the cause is something called ocean acidification, which is basically a change in the chemistry of the ocean because of our carbon dioxide emission. So he identified the cause of it, and then they could say, okay, it's linked to carbon dioxide emission. So basically the main problem is carbon dioxide emission. And this is a paper that actually identified the main polluter, so the main source of carbon dioxide, linking to this problem for the oyster farmer. So what you want to do, as I said, is mitigate that, is basically reduce carbon dioxide emission. But then the problem is that that's a very, very complicated thing to achieve. It requires global changes and so on. So that's not going to happen in the time scale that is relevant for these farmers. So they had to find something else. So they knew that mitigation was important, but they needed also to adapt. And to adapt, they needed science. So how could they buy some time? How could they maintain their production, knowing that there is a phenomenon of ocean acidification that they won't be able to cope with, probably through mitigation for decades? And again, science came to the rescue. And there have been a lot of different studies that investigate the impact of ocean acidification on oysters. And they realized that actually overall, oysters are quite tough. They can cope with a little bit of acidification, except for 24 hours. So at the beginning of their life, when they are larvae, they need to precipitate calcium carbonate to produce a shell. And if the ocean is more acidic at that time, at this particular time of their development, then they are unable to produce their little spats and they die. But if you make them pass this stage, then they are okay, and they can actually survive a little bit of ocean acidification. That was a great discovery, because that means they change the way they are doing things. So for example, they are monitoring the carbonate chemistry of the water, and when the water is too acidic, instead of having water flowing into the hatcheries, they work in closed systems and they keep the chemistry right. Or another way of coping with that is they send the oysters somewhere else where the chemistry of the water is better to produce the spat, and then the spat are sent back and put there in the field. So basically science here was needed. It's been identified what kind of adaptation could be implemented, and it's been implemented. Several other adaptation strategies have been identified. They also realized that some strain of oysters are more resilient to acidification than others. Like, it's genetic, it's Darwin. We don't have all the same possibilities, and some oysters are better than others. So using these oysters in aquaculture is another adaptation strategy. And the good news is that now they are back into business. So the problem has been identified, the cause has been found, it's carbon dioxide emission. You basically have a solution, which is mitigation, but the timeline is wrong. So that's the importance of identifying the timeline, of implementing the solution, and also what can be done. So they decided to take another action, which is adaptation, and it worked. So that's a really good positive example showing that if you identify your priorities, if you do the right science, you can actually resolve the problem. Another case study that is a little bit closer to us is basically if we want to manage the ecosystem, the ocean ecosystem efficiently, you need to be able to forecast. Like if you want to organize a barbecue tomorrow, you want to know what the weather will be. So if you want to pick the best day, you're going to be able to do it by looking at the weather forecast and check which one is the best and do it there that day. It's the same with the ocean. If you want to be able to identify where the impact will be, what's going to happen, protect several ecosystem, you need to forecast. And to do that, you need data. And the thing is that collecting data on what's happening out there is already quite complicated, but understanding the impact is even more complicated. And what we have to realize, and I mentioned that before, is that the ocean is threatened by a bunch of different things. So it's not one problem, it's pollution, it's global changes, it's overfishing, and all these things are working together. So if you want to forecast what's going to happen in the future, we have to understand what's happening for all these different things and how they interact together. And that's very, very complicated, because if we want to implement solution based on science-based management, you really need to identify what are the key main drivers that I need to address. Is it global warming? Is it overfishing? Is it plastic pollution? And to do that, you need to understand the level of exposure, so how intense are these different things, and the impact on biology. And the impact on biology is quite a complicated question. And for the moment, we don't have the understanding on all these things work together. You have some attempt to create forecasting system, and in Sweden, in HAF, for example, the authority there, they use something called Symphony, which is a forecasting model where they try to say, okay, what's going to happen in a year under these and these conditions. The problem with this forecasting system is that they don't have the resolution yet to really be useful, because at the moment, the way they address The interactions between different stressors like temperature, pH, and pollution is by doing, if you have stressor A plus stressor B, the impact will be C. And that doesn't work that way. That never works that way. And we don't understand yet very well how that works. And just to illustrate that with a stupid metaphor, is that if you check my dancing skill and how that correlates with the alcohol level in my blood, I'm quite a poor dancer in general. That would be on the left-hand side. But if you give me a little bit of alcohol, I'm less shy and I will be a little bit more outgoing, and then my dancing skill will probably increase a little bit. It will move from A to B. So under the assumption that things are additive, which is what symphony is mostly doing, that would mean that if I drink a lot, I would be an amazing dancer. And I can tell you, if you watch me at a party, if I reach a certain threshold in alcohol content in my blood, I'm a terrible dancer. And I guess that would be the most for everything. So things are not linear. That's the point. It's like the performance curve for temperature, for salinity, for oxygen, for pollution are never linear like this. So the point is, if we want to project what's going to happen in the future, we need to understand these complex curves and how things interact. And things can interact in very complex way. And again, to use an alcohol-related metaphor, if you mix two drivers like beer and wine, it's fairly easy to predict what's going to happen to you with a little bit of experience. If you have 2 beers and a glass of wine, or 2 glasses of wine and 1 beer, you kind of know what's going to happen. But then if you start to mix with another driver that could be drugs and wine, you can have complex interactions happening and bad things happening that you didn't anticipate it by taking only one of them. So basically, that's a huge scientific gap. If we want to be able to forecast what's going to happen in the ocean in the future and use models like symphony that I mentioned before, you need to increase your understanding of how these things interact. And today you have a lot of interest for these things. So you have a lot of interest for what's called the multiple stressors in the ocean. For example, you have the IOC UNESCO working group that is now working in a policy document that could be used for lobbying and say, okay, to different policymakers in different places, we need better information on how all these things interact. And for sure, this is going to be a main topic for the ocean decade. And there will be hopefully fundings called for project and research. So when it comes to this science-based management, we need to be able to forecast. And to do that, we need to understand global and local pressures. And really the gap in understanding, if you want to achieve this, is natural science. We need to understand how these things interact. So that will require a lot of science, both at the chemical and biological level. And I'm going to finish now with a last case study on individual changes. So in a way, we know that society will have to change as a whole. We are facing major challenges related, for example, to carbon dioxide emission. We know what to do. We need to decrease this, but it's not happening. And I really like this quote from Ken Caldera that was really also at the center of the creation of CeCAR, and saying that people have to sacrifice a little bit of their short-term self-interest to help the world be a better place for the long term. And how you get people to do that is the most important research that can be done. And I could not agree more. And that's exactly what CeCAR is all about. How can we make societal changes to actually drive these changes that we need? And in a way, part of the reason why we are not as good as we should be is a failure to communicate. And that's another quote from a fantastic artist called Tim Minchin. He said that the idea that the science of anthropogenic global warming is controversial is a powerful indicator of the extent of our failure to communicate. Because overall, natural scientists are poor communicators. And we are poor communicators because we are not trained to do so. And we tend to be really nerdy. So we cared about things that nobody else cares about. And that means that we have this kind of science supply paradigm again, where we do our science, we communicate that to society, and we hope for the change. But we all know that it doesn't work. If we really want to drive change, we need to, having information will not be enough, because information doesn't drive change most of the time, at least not at individual level, and sometimes even create more polarization. You're just going to use what you want in your understanding, in your knowledge, to reinforce your position. And you can see that with all this insane discussion you have about the coronavirus online. Everybody is an expert now, and everybody cherry pick what they want to make their point. So what we argued really with some colleagues a few years ago is that we have to change the way we do science. Instead of doing our science and communicate it to outside, we have to do science that is more society relevant. So we have to move out of what we call the zone of complexity, which is complex science with low societal values and all things that nobody cares about, and move into the consensus zone, where we go in a place where we have simple science on things that people care about. And to test that idea, we did this experiment that Sverker mentioned before about on seafood. So we decided if we want to talk to Swedish people here, let's talk about the seafood they like. And we decided to work on shrimps, the northern shrimp that is really common in Sweden, part of the culture, so the northern shrimp. And what we did is we decided to see if we can make people taste the changes that are occurring in the ocean. So we did an experiment where we exposed them to different scenarios of ocean acidification and then make a random tasting. And people could actually taste the difference. So they realized that the shrimp of the future didn't taste as good as the taste of the present. I think they like, I'm not sure if they taste less good, but they actually like them less. And that was an eye-opening moment for most of them. And so we published the paper, made a press release, showing that acidification can alter the taste of shrimp. And that actually was good enough in itself to reach a lot of people out there that could learn about ocean acidification and what it is, and also stimulate a lot of research all around the world. But more interesting, we tested like by physically experiencing something that is invisible, like ocean acidification, will that actually increase the probability of people to change? And by change, is like reduce their carbon footprint. So to test this idea, we went to a school in Lysekil and exposed students to different types of information. So we either like gave them like classic science communication, what acidification is, and so on. Some of them were extremely engaged, so they came to work with me at the station for a while, and some of them had the basic science communication information plus a shrimp tasting. So we make them physically experience what acidification can do to marine creatures. And then we ask them at the end, are you willing to do something for the environment and the ocean? And we propose different targets of things they can easily implement at home, like eating less meat, reduce their traveling and stuff like that, and ask them to select some of those. And we could show that actually physically experiencing acidification through eating the shrimp was having a positive impact on their will to change, and they were actually implementing this change. So reconnecting, physically experiencing a change like this has a positive effect on their will to change. And just a little side story here, just to show that when you do this kind of experiment, you really have to be local. There's no communication strategy that's going to work everywhere. And we had an interesting observation by redoing exactly the same experiment with mussels. So we exposed mussels to different scenarios of future with warming, acidification, and so on, and we made a tasting. And we made the tasting as a station where we had a lot of guests from all around the world. And so it was random, and then when I checked the results, I was kind of shocked because basically a lot of the people in the room preferred the future mussels. So they actually thought that the mussels that were exposed to global warming and ocean acidification were tasting better than the one of the present, which is exactly the opposite of what I wanted to show. And then when we looked at the data a little bit more in detail, we realized that if we split the group into local versus non-local, so people coming from abroad, we had exactly the opposite result. So all the locals prefer the shrimp of today, the mussel of today, where all the foreigners, or most of them, preferred the mussel of the future. And the explanation was, reading through their comments, that the local mussel here in Sweden have a really strong taste. And if you're used to it, then you like it. But if you're not used to that, you actually think it's too strong of a taste and you prefer a more mild taste that the future mussel had. So that's to show you might actually miss your communication opportunity if you don't use the right tool here. If you want to convince people that there will be a change they don't want in the future, you have to use local species and local people. So in that case, what we can see is that we have a problem, acidification, the same as the one we had before, linked to carbon dioxide emission. We need people in society not only to change themselves, but also accept the political changes. That's very important. And to do that, we need to make them care. And to make them care, it's not just about communicating the science we do. We need to do specific science on things they care about and make them reconnect with the issue. And that's not a natural science problem. That's actually a social science issue. So you can see, depending on the cases, the priorities could be either natural science, like the multiple stressors, or social science, for example, in that case, communication science. What kind of information is more likely to drive change? And to finalize all this, the ocean is in trouble. That was kind of my message. The ocean is extremely important for us. We are now entering the UN decade for the ocean, and that's an amazing opportunity, and we really should take this opportunity to act, to identify systematically what needs to be done at different levels for policy, for citizen changes, for education, and so on, and really define a timeline about what can we do now? What can you do in 5 years? And to do that, what is preventing implementation? Is it social science? Is it natural science? And so on. And we should not reinvent the wheel. There's already a lot of really cool stuff that we can do out there. And my final thought will be like something that depressed me quite a bit lately. So I guess you all followed these really dramatic things that are happening in the US and all around the world, and the case of Floyd that has been murdered and trigger a lot of stuff. And that make me really reconsider what I do in life. Do any of the things I actually do matters? Can we really change? Because I was listening to this song by Rage Against the Machine, like, Killing in the Name, saying basically this song released in '92 has been a screaming call against institutionalized racism and police brutality, and nothing really changed in 28 years. This is still happening. So I was kind of depressed that day. I feel like, can we really change? Can we actually address global problems like climate change, ocean changes, if we can't even address something like racism, which seems scientifically so easy to explain? And the answer to that is yes. I have to believe that that is possible. We need to have hope. Scientists, science, society, human species has shown that we have so much potential to do amazing things. And if you remember Kennedy's talk about how to go to the moon, that was so inspiring, and they made it. And he said, like, we did it not because it was easy, but we did it because it's hard. And in a way, that's my message. We are facing a huge challenge. And if we take the Kennedy message and we just replace one thing, go to the moon by protect the ocean, which is probably an equivalent of a very challenging thing to do, then I believe we can achieve it. We choose, so I'm just gonna read it and finish with this. We choose to protect the ocean in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, what we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win. And with that, I'm thanking you not only to be there and to listen, but all of you for your passion and your work in trying to actually find the best way to drive change in society. And with that, I wait for your question. Thank you very much again for the organizer to give me the opportunity to talk today. That's been really great.